Hi, everyone. This is going to be a continuation of our series. This is episode 5 of our series. Paul was an Herodian. That means he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He says he's a Christian, but he really isn't, whether he knows or not. But he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And then that also fits into the Benjamite wolf prophecy of Genesis 49:27. Anyway, but this episode is going to be called Why in Revelation 9, verse 11, is John referring to an evil angel, likely Satan, as Apollyon? All right. So I hope you'll find this very educational and will help unravel even more why Paul's in the Bible as a test of us. Those who claim to follow Christ need to test the Bible. What we've been presented, is this in there? And is Jesus laid a test in there in the book of Revelation for us to find? Okay, let's continue. All right, so to get our bearings, let's ask a couple of questions that all then apply to the verse when I show it to you. Does Apollyon, in this verse, 9:11 of Revelation, mean one who destroys? Does this connect to Apollo in Greek religion at Delphi? Yes, he's also known as a destroyer or dismemberer, whom Paul's Jesus quotes in Apollo's second persona, Dionysius. And Paul's Jesus on the road to Damascus, according to Paul in Acts 26, when he's talking to King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa, and Festus, he quotes a play in which Dionysius, which in the cult at Delphi of Apollo, they believe another name for Apollo is Dionysius. So is this all connecting the dots? Let's first read the verse. Revelation 9, verse 11 in King James. Quote, "And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue has his name Apollyon." Now, I'll explain to you in a second, but Abaddon means destroyer in Hebrew. Apollyon means one who destroys, but it also has the significance of the god Apollo. So let me prove that to you. At BibleRef.com, you can see Apollyon in Greek literally means one who destroys. But at the same time, commentary after commentary will tell you it also means Apollo. And this is in Gann's commentary. There's also a connection with the Roman Emperor Domitian, whose patron god Apollo was symbolized by the locust. And they're trying to tie in Apollo to the person of Domitian, but still the word Apollo is being recognized as in that reference. Here's Kaufman's commentary on the Bibles. Apollyon, both Caligula and Nero aped the pagan god Apollo. James Moffat, opposite page 408. And Beckworth thought the use of this name was a direct allusion to such a pretending Roman emperor. Then it skips down here. If so, it is the same as saying that this Roman emperor Apollo was one and the same as the devil. Okay, so again, just realize there's more than one way of seeing and reading the word Apollo. So it's a covert second meaning. So it's still there, and you could think he's talking about simply one who destroys, but you can see there's secondary meanings obviously could be intended, and I'm going to suggest one they're not pointing at. Now, I'm going to suggest something that's going to appear radical until you know more about the book of Revelation. So I'm going to tell you something about the book of Revelation. What I'm going to suggest is that this is talking about the message of Paul on behalf of Paul's Jesus not being the true Jesus. And this, again, is a wolf in sheep's clothing situation, whether Paul knows it or not. So this is more a comment by John on whose Paul's Jesus was, calling him Apollo. Now, let me prove to you a little bit why you can accept that's where this is going. And so everybody's looking at Caligula or Domitian, and they believe in Apollo. But there's somebody else right in the New Testament who believes in Apollo and is a disciple and is in Colossians 1. I showed you in the prior passage of this series of Paul's and Herodian. In the prior episode, I showed you that he is teaching in Colossians 1:15-18 the exact principles of the Delphic oracle doctrines that even Plutarch put in print in the first early 100s. So listen to this. You may not know this, and it'll be a surprise to some of you. Ezra Palm Gould in the year 1900 wrote a book called The Biblical Theology of the New Testament. And what he's going to say is just simply recapping what the scholarship has now documented, beginning with Bauer in the early 1800s, around 1830, and then over and over again, and even Renan, a pro-Paul. And you have to know Bauer wasn't anti-Paul. He just spotted these things in the book of Revelation that are anti-Paul. And I'll show to you. I'll just read you this quote in Ezra Palmer Gould in a minute. But there was also a guy named Herodian who writes a whole book in defense of Paul and just excoriates the Apostle John for writing such hateful things about Paul that are they're secretly or covertly left there in the book of Revelation chapter 2. And he just says it's the evil of Apostle John to do that. It's just hate. But by the time he gets to page 300, he basically goes, you know what, now that I think about it, you know what, Paul is a hidden rock. We just need to follow the words of Jesus. And he didn't decide to go back and erase the earlier part of his book, but clearly he was pro Paul when he made these realizations. And so I'm just going to read you Ezra Palmer Gould. He's a doctor of divinity. You can see it right here, DD. And he's also written a critical and exegetical commentary on the Gospel of Mark. So he's a scholar. He's a theologian. He's well known. He's a famous name if you didn't know it. And this is what he writes in Biblical Theology of the New Testament. But he claims without proof that, or implies that there's anti-Paulinist tampering with the book of Revelation. Gould says this: the Apocalypse, which is now we usually call it Revelation, that one that was written by John, represents an unqualified opposition to Paul. There's the text quote copied there. The Apocalypse is anti-Pauline, page 125. Revelation is a writing distinctly anti-Pauline, page 131, and there's the quote. Now, I want to just read you a little more extensively of what he's saying so you can grasp that this is a significant admission by pro-Paul people that Paul is being excoriated by whoever wrote the book of Revelation, but we know who it was. And Papias says, I was the amanuensis. Excuse me. We know Papias says I was the amanuensis, meaning the clerk who John in the late 90s, or excuse me, in the about 95, 96, is taking the words in Hebrew Aramaic of John and translating them into Greek for the Gospel of John. And Papias says that John had previously written the book of Revelation. And that means we have a firsthand witness that John not only wrote his gospel, but also that the book of Revelation was well known and accepted as work of Apostle John as well. And so this Papias lets us know there's no tampering here. It was written down. Papias was the guy who could verify with Apostle John. And that means it was written around 65, 67 AD, the book of Revelation. And John's alive for the next approximately 30 years. And so, if anyone tried tampering with it, he'd be the first one to know. And so it got circulated exactly the way it was intended for 30 years. And an apostle was directly traced to it, and a witness could verify that. Now, listen to what Ezra Palmer Gould says. Of the writings belonging to the later apostolic teachings, the synoptics, Peter and James, represent a qualified opposition to Paul, meaning it's teaching the law and Paul isn't. And it even says that in the next part here. He throws in falsehoods, so I'm not going to repeat falsehoods. Rejecting his statement of freedom from law as such. See? So what rejects this Paul's statement of freedom from the law? The synoptics, Peter and James. Okay, and those of you who think Peter is anti-law, you don't know Peter. As this Ezra Palmer Gould is saying, he stands with James, he stands with the synoptics, and rejecting the idea that there's freedom from the law as such. The Apocalypse, however, represents an unqualified opposition to Paul. So there's no exceptions, okay? It is not only extreme in its positions, meaning the book of Revelation is extreme, but violent in its language, and its Jewish messianism is of the most pronounced type. So he's trying to make it sound extremist, and he's definitely trying to undermine the book of Revelation. That is Ezra Palmer Gould, as well as other scholars have tried since, and some even claim it's heresy and all this kind of stuff. Oh, and I failed to remark. Look at here. He has a little side note. The Apocalypse, anti-Pauline. So that says it all in a nutshell. He's admitting it, even though he's a pro-Paul person. And that means if you're a pro-Paul person, you have to admit it too, unless you're going to go over this scholarship and you think you're going to beat it. If he couldn't beat it and he's a top dog scholar and he couldn't beat the arguments, they're true. What's happened since 1900? Nothing to change it, only to increase the recognition of it. But most of all, they just try to ignore it and hope it'll go away. And maybe in your mind, you don't know anything about it because nobody's talking about it anymore. But it never it never was able to be debunked as truly anti-Pauline. And then the question is, could they ever disengage the book of Revelation from John? That's impossible due to that statement that was recorded by Papias, and that was in the Toledo Bible of the 10th century. And that preserved the eyewitness account to John writing the gospel through this Papias as his assistant scribe, but Papias also then confirming the book of Revelation was written by Apostle John. Let's continue. Now, I'm going to switch over now to the Sect of Apollo at Delphi. Now, this is a distinct group, the most powerful part of actually all Greek religion was this Sect of Apollo. Now, that doesn't mean everybody outside of this region has all their secrets, but their secrets are revealed by Plutarch, and he was a priest for 30 years to the Delphic Oracle, and he would listen to her mumbling in glossalia, and nobody could understand it but the priest, and then he would write it down and tell the person who's paying as a patron for an oracle from the Delphic Oracle, a lady who does this job from 600 BC all the way up to the time of Constantine. By the way, Constantine, when he was supposedly a Christian, transfers the Delphic Oracle to Constantinople, and he brings her tripod and all the things she does for her oracles. But Christians are never told that, of course. It's still there. You can still see her tripod sitting in Constantinople. So it's a secret that is not really a secret, but is hidden and not talked about. But anyway, the point is this. He is revealing the secrets of this group, or revealing, I should say, the doctrines of this group. And one of them, the wiser sort, cloaking their meaning from the vulgar, he says, this is page 13, called the change into fire Apollo. So in other words, the creation event, the change in things, they're called Apollo. That's one name for this creator power on account of the reduction to one state, and also Phoebus on account of its freedom from defilement and purity. But the condition and change of his turning and subdivision to airs, water, and earth, and the production of animals and plants, they enigmatically term exile and dismemberment. So when Apollo, this fire, basically does the creation event, and he creates air, water, and earth, and the production of animals and plants, they call this activity dismemberment. Okay? Exile and dismemberment, meaning destruction. So it's destroying one thing the way that you would see the air, water, and fire in one way, and recreating it a different way. So you have to destroy something. This is the Greek mind of the Apollo fans. You have to this Apollo has to destroy something in order to create something new. That's an interesting concept, right? But that's what they're saying. And and then they name him Dionysius. So that's his second name. And that's what we showed in the last episode. That is so clearly, Paul is quoting from the play Bacchae by Epimenides. I can never say it. Epimenides, that he is saying in that play that the god Dionysius says to King Pantheus, you cannot kick against the pricks. That plural pricks there is meter, meaning it's a rhyme. To rhyme the word prick in there, the expression was normally, you can't kick against the prick. You're an animal. You can't go against this little stick in your body, and that's put there to keep you from going too fast. You can't kick against it. But for play, you have to turn it into a plural so it rhymes. So clearly, Paul is putting in the mouth of Jesus in Acts 26 this quote from that play, where Dionysius, who really is Apollo in the Apollo sect religion of Delphi, according to Plutarch, an eyewitness, a priest for 30 years to the Delphic Oracle, and he's writing this in the early 100s. This is as close as you could possibly imagine to prove what the Delphic Oracle teachings had always been in the 40 years prior, when Paul was there and at Delphi, he was at Philippi, and he meets the Python priestess, and she tells everybody, hey, Paul is teaching us a way of salvation to the Most High God, which she never tells you. She's under the control of the Python under Apollo, and that she means Apollo. So she's telling everybody who's an Apollo follower in Acts 16:16 that Paul is a follower of the Most High God, Apollo, not Yahweh. And she's trying to endorse people to follow him. And here we have proof positive that the word for destruction connects itself to Apollo exactly as the way Plutarch just describes on this page 13. Let me go to the second page here. They also tell of certain destructions and disappearances and diseases and new births, which are riddles and fables pertaining to the aforesaid transformations. So pause there. So you see how you have destructions and new birth? So to create, you have to destroy. I mean, you could almost say that's actually a truism of you want to build a car. Well, then you have to take metal out of the ground, you destroy it, in a sense, burn it and melt it down, turn it into fire, destroying it that way. And then you can now mold it and now create and have new birth. You see how this is not crazy the way he's saying it. It just may not, Greeks are very logical in their way of describing things. And that means they can believe in something being both a destroyer and the creator of new birth. You see that? All right. So I'll leave it there. Now I want to go back to what I showed in the last episode in this article called Paul and Euripides Bacchae in Acts 26, verse 14 by Caffeine for the Masses. Very good article. And he's pointing out that Festus in chapter 26 says, Paul, your much learning has made you go mad. And the reference to word learning means it has to be something written, something that you would have learned that way, not a revelation or vision in heaven or something like that. And he says, if you read what Paul is saying, has just said, is this verse, 10 verses earlier in Acts 26:14, that his Jesus is saying, it is hard for you to kick against the pricks. And so the learning that that Festus is referring to is this play, and Paul is taking this play, and he's saying you've taken it to a crazy level, okay? And he knows who he's quoting because this is a very famous play in that time period, okay? So, in this play, which we showed you, it's called Hippolytus the Bacchae by Euripides. And Dionysius says you can't fight against a god, and it's better to yield to him in prayer, meaning himself, and sacrifice than kick against the pricks, since Dionysius is God and thou art mortal. So Dionysius is God, but the Apollo people say Apollo's name is also Dionysius. So the Apollo people at Delphi, not other Greeks necessarily, but the Delphic sect, according to Plutarch, writing as one of the priests, the two priests that rotate the job for 30 years, he did this, and now he has made it clear what is really going on, and you can connect the dots. And let's go back now to Festus saying, Paul, your learning has made you crazy. He's talking about something in writing that you've heard or read, and that would have been this quote. He just made 10 verses. Paul had made 10 verses earlier, and he's trying to say, trying to say, Jesus. He's saying, in essence, you're trying to say Jesus is the dead and dying God of Dionysius, because Dionysius dies, and then he resurrects. So Paul is clearly the mind of Festus is trying to say that's who Jesus is. Now, Dionysius, which is actually, like I said, and I showed you another name for Apollo, he is the god, son of God, Zeus. So Zeus didn't create the heavens and earth. Zeus did not do that at all. And he sired, however, Dionysius, the son of God, also known as Apollo. Then what happens is Apollo creates the heavens and earth and all living things, according to what I just read you from Plutarch in his book called On the E. Okay, so now, again, I want to tie it all back into what we all saw here. Colossians 1:14-18. Here is your proof positive that Paul is a fan of the Apollo religion and not anything common with Christianity. And please note, he doesn't say there's a Godhead. He is literally saying there can be two gods. One is a created being and the other isn't. Listen again, Colossians 1:14-18. In whom, Jesus, we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. A lot of people tried arguing about this, but it's proto, which means first, and tokos, childbirth. So you can't get away from the fact this is talking about a born or specifically created being by the invisible God of every creature. For By him, Jesus, were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. So twice in verse 16, Paul says all things were created by Jesus twice. See? All things created by him, all things were created in the first part of 16, and at the end of 16, all things were created by him. That is got to be a God. He's the created being. He's a prototokos. He was the first child born in in the universe, but he then turns around and creates everything else exactly like Zeus sired Apollo, and exactly like Apollo, as I just showed you from Plutarch, created all things from fire. And then he's also known as Dionysius. And then you can put it all together. Paul is quoting Dionysius from that play. Get back to that, where clearly he's quoting from the play. Dionysius says, better to yield him prayer and sacrifice. He's telling the king, you better do this to me than kick against the prick, since Dionysius is God and thou but mortal. Of course, Dionysius is speaking. So that puts it all together. And now you know the rest of the story. Why, when you get to this account in Acts 26:14 and 24, where they think Festus thinks he's crazy, but Herod Agrippa is quiet. Herod Agrippa is his relative, by the way. That's what we know separately from all of this. And but they both knew what he was saying, and he was identifying his Jesus with Dionysus. Now let's go all the way back to our Apostle John. What is he conveying to us? Well, we know independently that he's anti-Paul. And it was covertly held there. It was hard to see, in the sense that if you were Rome, you wouldn't detect who is being identified here. If it's your guy Paul is being exposed as an infiltrator and trying to bring in this belief system in Apollo into our faith, you wouldn't know what he was doing. You wouldn't connect the dots. And in fact, I even think the way he defined this thing where he says it's Abaddon is to not mislead, but give you a different emphasis, that you think, well, I should just look for the meaning of Apollyon is a destroyer, right? As a god. So yeah, they're not going to though pick out and say to themselves, if you're a Roman let's say you're even King Agrippa, King Agrippa, and you're reading it, you go, oh, well, Hebrew, I know Hebrew, Abaddon is destroyer, and then the other name is he that destroys, Apollyon, and, you could read it just saying it's he that destroys, and so it's just really a definition. Instead of what it really is, it's identifying the evil angel as Apollo, and that then ties it back to Paul, so it's another anti-Paul remark in the book of Revelation to help reveal it to us, but it was covertly placed there, so it's hard to detect, but you have to have ears to hear or else you're going to miss it. And that just reconfirms exactly what this man says, even though he resists it and tries to say it isn't true. He admits the apocalypse is anti-Pauline. All right, everybody. I hope that helps you know that you have more evidence that Paul was an Herodian. He was an infiltrator, and John and Jesus had put this forward in a way that would be able to successfully pass through the filter of censorship by Rome, that it wouldn't feel that their infiltrator had been fully exposed. But for a later generation, our time, beginning in the 1800s, our scholars were at least faithful to tell us the truth of what was there. Bauer was the first one who did it. Renan did it, and then he admitted it all for 300 pages, and then he said, you know what, now that I think about it, I've been defending Paul all this time. I think he's a hidden rock that causes Christians to stumble. I think we should just follow the words of Jesus. That's how he ends the book called St. Paul. Can you believe it? 300 pages of faithfully defending Paul and calling John the apostle a hater of Paul. And then he turns around and says, you know what? I get it. We need to follow Jesus. That's a great, he is my poster boy of what the Jesus Words Only movement is all about. We all are going to have started as Christians or Protestants believing in Paul. You got to go through this catharsis where you study it, you research it, you absorb it. You got to read the book of Revelation, see all the anti-Paul remarks, and then you got to go, oh my, I got to make a decision here. Why am I following Paul instead of Jesus. And they are diametrically different. Oh my goodness. And that's what Renan went through. And I hope all of you who are on the fence, this will help you one more step to get a little closer. Just saying, you know what? I'm going to get rid of this guy, Paul. What do I need him for? How many people were saved? Paul, one last thing, and I'll let you go. Paul, when he became a quote Christian in that quote conversion, what does he do? He doesn't do any evangelism for 14 years. Did you know that? He says I went back to Jerusalem for 2 weeks. I spent some time with Peter, and I met James, the brother of Jesus. But he doesn't do any evangelism, and he says then 14 years later, after I was in Arabia all that time, I then came into Jerusalem for I think he went first to Antioch, and then he goes to Jerusalem. But he's doing nothing. There is no record of him doing a gosh darn thing. He doesn't even claim he did anything in that time period, except perhaps he's saying, I'm getting my revelations from Jesus. So maybe he's listening to some spirit talking to him, but he's doing no evangelism. And so that means for 14 years, people were coming to Christ well before Paul. And by the Acts 21, James is able to say to Paul, do you see how many myriads of Jews have come to Christ, zealous for the law? That's what he says in Acts 21, verse 21. Of course, that is downplayed in the word myriad, which is the numeral 10,000 in Greek. It should say many tens of thousands. That's what it actually says, but you are misled, and it says many thousands, as if from Acts 3 and Acts 2 and 3 there was already 8,000 in Acts 2 and 3, but by Acts 21, according to the way it's translated, you would never know that it went past the first few thousand we got in Acts 2 and 3. Instead, it says many tens of thousands. So all of this is the product not of Paul at all. It's the product of the 12, and James in particular, the brother of Jesus, leading them. So again, all of this is done in a way by our, I would just say, the narrative shapers of Pauline Christianity is to not let you see and let you think critically about facts which run counter to the validity of Paul or the necessity of following him, because there's 14 years where all the Christians are completely non-Pauline because he isn't even preaching and teaching yet. All right, God bless everybody. Ciao. Bye.